So thank you very much, folks, for joining us again for the second of our Jubilee Talks. This week we have Alan Greer speaking about Cromghlinn to Royal Hillsborough. Alan is Business Development and Sales Executive at Historic Royal Palaces. A graduate in law and with a master's in Irish history and politics, his work benefits from a very genuine love of the place, as well as interest in the wider historical and political context within which Hillsborough Castle sits. He's worked in a number of roles at Historic Royal Palaces over the last 4 years, and now enjoys promoting and selling the castle and its gardens to societies and clubs, organising group visits, tour operators, and travel trade organisations. Having for many years been, to all intents and purposes, off limits to visitors for security reasons, the mission of Historic Royal Palaces is to make Hillsborough Castle accessible to all, and for the stories associated with it to be more widely known and better understood. This brings us to the theme of this evening's talk, Cromghlinn to Royal Hillsborough, a county downtown and its association with monarchy from the Restoration to the Platinum Jubilee. And with that, Alan, I'll hand over to yourself.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Nick. And the first success is that I've realised that I needed to unmute myself. So we're all systems go. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be able to talk with you this evening and on such a pleasant topic as Hillsborough and its royal connections. For some of us, meeting by Zoom and Teams and all of that stuff has become such a part of life over the past couple of years that in some ways we might feel we've had enough of them, but this is a great way. Everything used in moderation is a good thing. So it's a really good way for us all to be able to get together and have these talks. I'm glad actually that Nick had slightly reduced the length of the title that I'd submitted when we first started talking about this. I realized I was in danger of perhaps slightly over-intellectualizing it a little. It reminded me of some of those specialist subjects on Mastermind, sort of ordinary enough topics that become dissertation length. I'm going to see now if we can take the next step and just share my screen. I will also make a confession at this point. I'm not actually sitting in the Red Room of Hillsborough Castle, just in case you think I've set up an office there. And I do have 2 dogs lying in wait here as well. So if I completely lose my composure and start flailing around, that may be because somebody has had the audacity to ring a doorbell or something like that. So, but I'll try and restore order as quickly as possible. So let's just see if I can share this screen. Are we getting that first slide, which should say Historic Royal Palaces?
Yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you. So basically what I'm going to do for the next sort of 45 minutes then is to talk just about the various different phases of the village and subsequently town of Hillsborough and the many and various ways that it's hosted, entertained and served the royal family over the course of some 4 centuries. Let's see, oh yeah, so there we are. So and the story broadly breaks down into 2 halves really. The first concerns the Hill family, from which Hillsborough derives its name. Who were they? What did they do? And what was their involvement with the monarchs of the 17th and 18th centuries? And then the second half of the story is mainly concerned with the 20th century and the establishment of the tradition of royal visits to Northern Ireland and Hillsborough specifically, which ultimately culminates in the recent granting of royal status to the town and the forthcoming celebrations of Her Majesty the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Those 2 phases of that history are simultaneously woven together, but also separated by the political shifts on the island of Ireland, with which we are all, to some or greater or lesser extent, familiar with, not the least of which was partition and the very creation of Northern Ireland a century ago. So to refer briefly to the forthcoming Jubilee again, no British monarch before Queen Elizabeth II has reached the milestone of a Platinum Jubilee. Indeed, very few monarchs have at all, the last being the late King of Thailand in 2016. Prior to the Queen, it was another Queen, of course, Victoria, who had cause to celebrate a succession of jubilees, in her case, of course, silver, gold, and finally diamond in 1897. In between times, only George V reigned long enough to reach his silver jubilee, surviving the celebration of that by just a year. The Queen's reign is remarkable in many and several ways, many of which will be remarked upon by commentators more qualified than I to speak of them. However, the occasion of the Jubilee and the length of the Queen's reign is also an opportunity to reflect upon not only that event, but the royal connection with Hillsborough, going back to the very creation of the modern settlement. Just a brief explanation. I mean, I work for Historic Royal Palaces, which is an independent conservation charity, and we look after 6 extraordinary places. And whilst I will properly concentrate on Hillsborough as part of this talk, it's worth just mentioning the others because they're linked historically and not simply just through being looked after by ourselves. Perhaps the most iconic is the Tower of London, which has been a fortress, prison, place of torture, execution, palace, home. Thankfully, the least worst of those things still today. Hampton Court Palace, which was initially associated with Thomas Wolsey, and once he fell out of favour with King Henry VIII, with the king himself. Later additions and renovations of the palace by William III gave it its present twin identity of Tudor and Baroque. Kensington Palace, for many of us, associated with Diana, Princess of Wales, and the younger generation of royals, particularly Princes William and Harry, was also the childhood home of Queen Victoria. Kew Palace in Kew Gardens, associated with George III and Queen Charlotte, and Banqueting House, the last remaining part of the Palace of Whitehall, and where Charles I was deprived of his head. So Hillsborough and Castle and Gardens is the newest addition to the Historic Royal Palaces family, joining it just 8 years or so ago in 2014. Prior to our grand opening in 2019, the preceding 5 years were spent transforming the castle and the gardens to put it in a position to be able to welcome significant numbers of visitors from far and wide. With the addition of all the facilities required for that. Of course, like so many historic buildings and attractions, the last 2 years have been challenging in ways that we couldn't have imagined before 2020. But we look forward to better and busier times, and there's nothing better than a Jubilee to celebrate success, longevity, and indeed the bigger picture. And what Hillsborough means to each of us will partly depend on where we are from, and also to some degree on what generation we belong to, because it's gone through various different phases. Broadly speaking, Hillsborough is known for being a well-conserved, busy, small town located within the Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council area with a pretty forest park, a castle associated with royal visits and political gatherings. I remember my early days at the castle visiting the post office with a uniform quite clearly stating Historic Royal Palaces, Hillsborough Castle, and somebody commenting, "Oh, I see you work at Government House." So technically not known as Government House for the best part of 50 years. It just shows you how names and places attach themselves and mean different things to different people across the generations. And we'll talk through the different phases as we go through. Some 400 years ago, however, it was known as Cromghlinn, which is Irish for Crooked Glen. And the name refers to the sort of meandering stream which still twists its way through the area. You can see on the picture on the left, Hillsborough with the spire of St Malachy's Church in the far left, or hopefully you can see that. And then just to the right of that, to the fore of the lake, you can see the fort. And that's where the original settlement of Cromghlinn, the main part of the settlement, would have been. Very little is actually known of the area before the year 1600, although it's believed that there was an ecclesiastical site established from around about 600 AD, which was subsequently dedicated around about the 12th century to Malachy O'Maguire, who had been Bishop of Down and the Archbishop of Armagh. The Hill family, from whom the town gets its name, arrived on the scene as the 16th century gave way to the 17th. And Sir Moses Hill, it's actually spelled Moises, so it's kind of Moyses, I tend to say Moises, but I'm guessing it's a derivation of Moses. He arrived in Ireland in the late 1590s as an officer in the army of Elizabeth I under the command of the Earl of Devereux. And anyone who knows their Irish history will be aware that the Elizabethan army ultimately defeated the rebellion of Hugh O'Neill and his allies, culminating in the well-known Flight of the Earls, with many destined to live as exiles in France after 1603. So Sir Moises, like many ambitious men, and indeed in common with several men of the Hill family, married well. Marrying well was a very good tactic, and in this case, locally, his wife was Alice MacDonald, the sister of Sorley Boy MacDonald. And peace then having resumed after the various battles, Sir Moise, he bought land. And by the time of his death in 1630, he had accumulated great estates in Antrim and Down, including over 5,000 acres of land in Cromghlinn from Brian Og McGuinness, that was around about 1611, and land from Con O'Neill of Castlereagh and the estate of Hill Hall. His marriage added estates at Carrickfergus, Larne, including Olderfleet Castle, and Lisburn. And in the 1630s, his son Peter built a defensive fort, which should be, to protect the road from Carrickfergus to Dublin. The developing settlement was substantially damaged during the 1641 rebellion, and in 1655 the estate passed to Peter's brother, Colonel Arthur Hill, who set about repairing the damage. He was granted a charter, making him and his descendants hereditary constables of the fort, with the command of 20 warders. The warders remain to this day in the form of a historical society, bringing colour and ceremony to occasions. As you can see there, that's the present day bugler just on the right hand side of the picture at the state entrance of the castle. I mentioned briefly earlier the demise of Charles I, executed at Banqueting House in 1649. So that early form of Republican government having been seen to have failed, Charles II returned to the throne in 1661. And that kind of brings us to the next key phase in the development of Hillsborough. Colonel Arthur Hill made sure to pledge allegiance to the monarchy in advance of the return of the king, and in 1662 was rewarded Charles II granting borough status to Cromghlinn. In addition to being constable of the castle and maintaining his warders, he now had permission to hold a market, to maintain law and order, and send 2 members to represent Down in the Parliament. And of course, that was in those days the Irish Parliament in Dublin. And from that point onwards, one of the elected members was always a member of the Hill family, a tradition that continued well into the 19th century. It was also in that period that the parish church of St. Malachy's was first constructed. And one of the effects of granting the borough status was that gradually the name of Cromghlinn fell out of use, and the village started to become known as the Borough of the Hills, or Hillsborough. And so we arrive at the first member of the royal family to see or set foot in Hillsborough, one who of course had a fateful and pressing engagement on the island of Ireland, which is often seen from the perspective of local contemporary politics even, but was of course in fact part of a wider European political contest. And that of course I'm referring to was none other than King William III. And prior to the famous battle fought against James II, William stayed 3 nights at the castle, apparently saying before he left, "I have not come here to wait for the grass to grow beneath my feet." So whilst at Hillsborough, he renewed the Regium Donum, which was the grant to Presbyterian ministers intended to recognise the loyalty of the Presbyterians of Ireland to the Crown. This was, of course, before the 1798 rebellion, but we'll come to that in a moment. And the stone tablet in the top right hand of the screen there just commemorates that event. Recognition of the increasing importance of the Hill family came in 1717. Little by little, various stages, they're always basically moving up in the world. And Trevor Hill was created Viscount Hillsborough by George I. The castle and the estate passed through 2 more members of the Hill family until 1742, when the estate was inherited by Wills Hill. And he's arguably the most significant family figure in the history of the castle, particularly with reference to the present day castle. Once again, it was through service to the crown that his reputation and status was established and grew. He was made an earl in 1751, and it was around about that time that he began the process of constructing a new home. There are some accounts of building commencing a little bit earlier in the early parts of the early years of the 18th century, and that it may have been destroyed by fire. But what we certainly know is that by the middle part of that century, it was felt that a new home befitting of the family's status was necessary. Walter Harris, in his book, The Ancient and Present State of County Down, written in 1744, tells us of Wills Hill's intention to rebuild and improve the whole town. It says the present Right Honourable Lord intends to build a new mansion house and has fixed on a plan for a new town to be built in the form of a large square with a stately market house in the centre. And that basically remains as good a description of Hillsborough today as it was 250 years ago, albeit with a lot of urban sprawl and lots of new housing estates fanning out from that, of course. Many of the smart townhouses and shops for which Hillsborough is known date to that period. So really the 1750s to the 1780s is kind of the key period in the building of the town. Wills Hill moved through a number of positions in the government of George III, culminating in his appointment as Secretary of State for the Colonies between 1668 and 1772. And it was in that capacity that he encountered Benjamin Franklin. Their relationship got off to what you might call a shaky start, to say the least, having in October 1770, he rejected Franklin's credentials as the governor of Massachusetts because they hadn't been signed by the governor. So during the autumn of 1771, Franklin visited Ireland and Scotland on a diplomatic mission. In Dublin Castle, waiting to meet the Lord Lieutenant, he encountered Wills Hill, a man he understood to have ridiculed him as a fractious man and a Republican. I will just clarify, we've got Wills Hill just on the left-hand side of the screen here, being looked after by our Castles and Collections Manager, just so we don't get the two of them confused. David making sure that Wills Hill is kept in good order there. And of course, on the right-hand side, then we have Benjamin Franklin. In fact, at that particular point in time, Franklin really hadn't moved to his final conclusion in terms of the Americas. He was seeking merely a more equitable relationship with Great Britain. Hill surprised him by being friendly and insisted that he come to visit his new home in Hillsborough and offering his son Arthur as a tour guide. And as Franklin was due to travel north to catch a boat from Donaghadee to Port Patrick, which was the main sea connection in those times, he could hardly refuse. Franklin records in his diary that he was well looked after at Hillsborough. However, Franklin's autobiographer records that he felt that Hill had apprehended an approaching storm and was desirous of lessening beforehand the number of enemies he had so imprudently created. So broadly speaking, the conclusion seems to be that as a diplomat, he didn't quite succeed. In any case, Franklin had been concerned at the conditions that he'd found in Ireland. And this can hardly have inclined him towards an outcome more favourable to the British point of view. Franklin's time at Hillsborough, therefore, really has to be regarded as the high point in their relationship. If anything, it just soured from there on. And the rest, as they say, is history, with Franklin, of course, being a signatory of the Declaration of Independence. Wills Hill, again, I said, like Hillmen before him and since, married well. In fact, he married well twice into the bargain, as did his daughter, Mary, who married a Cecil, becoming a Marchioness of Salisbury, and his son Arthur marrying Mary Sandys, which brought in estates at Edenderry in Offaly. Dundrum, and East Hampstead Park in Berkshire. In the 1760s and 1770s, he restored and improved the church. His intention in building his new home was to give the old one, which was the fort, to the Bishop of Down, along with the £20,000 fortune he spent on the church. It sort of attests to the suggestion that he fancied the parish church becoming the Cathedral of Down. It didn't. The honour instead, of course, going to Dromore. Despite being said to have been blamed by George III for losing much of the American colonies, he was nevertheless rewarded and raised to the rank of Marquess in 1789 and died aged 75 in 1793. Construction of the castle was completed during the time then of the second Marquess, and it's likely that it was around that time that the name of the castle left the previous, much more obviously fortified building and attached itself to the new home, which, as we know, broadly presents as a smart Georgian mansion. The late 1790s, of course, was once again a time of political unrest in Ireland, with rebellion in 1798, and a time of uncertainty, with the Act of Union being broadly speaking, the government's answer to that rebellion. Perhaps Lord Downshire felt tying the country closer to England was a recipe for more trouble, or perhaps he resented the potential loss of patronage and representation in Parliament, which of course would be abolished, and Irish MPs would be returned subsequently to Westminster. Whatever the reason, he was an opponent of the Union, and that left him and the family distinctly out of favour with the political establishment. And it appears that attempts were made to ruin his political career, and certainly his wife felt that his fall from grace and pressure put upon him was resulted in the decline in his health, and he died with the Act of Union barely passed at the age of just 48 in 1801. Leaving his young son to take over what was now one of the largest estates in Ireland. The third and fourth Marquesses spanned much of the 19th century and returned the estate to prosperity, reversing the political setbacks of the early part of the century, mainly through the device, one might say prudently, of avoiding politics altogether. Two imposing monuments were erected within the town to attest to their achievements, and it's said that the funeral of the third Marquess was said to have been one of the biggest ever witnessed in Ireland. The concentration on the management of the estates certainly paid off anyway, and contemporary reports indicate that the estates were well managed and with a degree of welfare paid towards the tenants. The fourth Marquess carefully navigated the devastating mid-century years of famine and actually contributed £20,000 to famine relief, which was a significant fortune in the 1750s. So after hosting William III in 1690 and Benjamin Franklin in 1771, visits by monarchs and statesmen would be relatively thin on the ground until the 20th century. The Hill family continued to represent Down as MPs in the Irish Parliament and managed the estates, and subsequently represented at Westminster as well until the mid-19th century. By the mid to late 19th century, East Hampstead Park in Berkshire had become the main home of the family, with others, including Hillsborough, being used just from time to time. And that period also saw land reform acts come to the fore of Irish politics, with land acts breaking up the larger estates. So right through then to the 20th century, between 1913 and 1919, the castle was actually leased. It was leased to Sir Thomas Dixon, at that time the High Sheriff of County Down, and of course more associated with Wilmot House within Sir Thomas and Lady Dixon Park. So they stayed for a little while at Hillsborough while that house was being made ready. So once again, Hillsborough entered a new century with the future somewhat less certain than it had appeared for most of the 19th, and the future of the whole island was unclear as home rule gave way to some of the harder political narratives that remain to some degree with us to this day. And following the Act of Partition in 1920, of course, with the island divided in two, and with the obviously, with the 6 counties of Ulster becoming Northern Ireland and the remaining 26 then becoming initially the Irish Free State and the Republic of Ireland. So from May 1921, when the Act came into force, the old Lord Lieutenancy of Ireland was replaced with governors, one representing the north and one representing the south, and they, of course, representing the monarch within each jurisdiction. It was the governor's role to give royal assent to acts passed by the Northern Ireland Parliament, and the British government began looking then for a suitable residence for the governor. A number of properties were apparently considered. An interesting one as a kind of a case study of what can happen to grand houses when there isn't a use found for them was actually Beaver House within what is now the sort of Beaver Park estate and Forest Park. By the time Hillsborough had assumed its new role, that house was empty. It was used by the Admiralty during the Second World War, was acquired by the Housing Trust, and by 1961 was demolished and is now where the car park at the Forest is. So it just is a bit of a case study of what can happen to big houses. Thankfully, Hillsborough Castle's outlook was much brighter. The castle and the remaining estate of approximately 100 acres was sold in January 1922. And it sold, if anybody's interested, property prices for around about £24,000, which we estimate is around about 1.3 million in today's money. Which, again, if anybody's familiar with property prices in the Hillsborough area, 100 acres and a whatever it is, I think it's 9-bedroom country mansion. I think 1.3 million is a reasonable bargain. The first governor then to move in was the Duke of Abercorn, and then for almost 5 decades, 5 governors, their wives, and some of their families made Hillsborough Castle their home. And from that point on, it served a dual function as the home, the governor's residence, as well as the official residence of the monarch in Northern Ireland. The Duke of Abercorn that we see here on the left-hand side of the slide, incidentally, great grandfather to Diana, Princess of Wales, was the longest serving governor, spending 25 years in post, and took up residence at the end of within Hillsborough Castle at the end of 1925. Of course, again, by the end of the 1960s, the political landscape was shifting. The governance of Northern Ireland was brought directly under the control of the government via direct rule, and the creation then at that point of the position in the cabinet of the Secretaries of State for Northern Ireland, of which there have been 22 in the half century since that position was created. So we're looking then through a few images now of the castle itself. We're looking through the state entrance doors where all of our visitors, be they day visitors, politicians, prime ministers, come through. And I'll just make a quick note of the crest upon the wall is that of the most illustrious order of St. Patrick. You can just about see it there behind the light, and that is an order of chivalry, of which the Queen remains sovereign and currently the only holder. It's been held by a number of members of the Hill family, and the last non-royal to be awarded the order was the Duke of Abercorn upon his appointment in 1922. Since which time it's only been awarded to members of the royal family, the last of those being the late King George VI, when he was Duke of York, and was actually presented it was awarded it on St. Patrick's Day in 1936. The blue background, a lot of people aren't aware that the original official colour of Ireland was actually that colour of blue. So that's it in the background. And then moving through here to some of we've got a nice image of the throne room. I will say, actually, technically, the chairs that you see at the end of the throne room there are not actually thrones. It's just a much easier name to give them. They are, in fact, technically chairs of state, and they represent the authority of the monarch. So those would actually have been used. The chair that, as we're looking at the picture on the left-hand side, would have been used by the governor, and then his wife would have sat beside him, because they were all male governors, and then the wives in those days, and that's where they carried out their official duties and functions. I'll also mention the Applique Banner that we have an enlarged version of to look at there. You can see it has the initials ER upon it. In actual fact, that was being crafted by the Belfast Society of Needlework, or School of Needlework, I should say, and it was being made for George V. So initially, that was actually a G on the left-hand side, but they were meeting, I think it was only 1 or 2 evenings a week, and there's a lot of work in that banner. And by the time they had finished it, I'm afraid George V had died. So they started to rework the E, and it was the G, and it was fashioned into an E, because of course the next monarch was due to be the Prince of Wales, who would then become briefly Edward VIII. But of course, within a few months, he had abdicated, and they weren't having a great deal of luck with this banner, so it was put away. Instead of reworking it again, they put it away for about 17 years. So technically, it should actually have a 2 on the end of it, of course, to represent Elizabeth II. But at least we've been able to legitimately put it out on display and make good use of it for a period of almost 70 years. So the first member of the royal family then to stay at Hillsborough Castle was actually in 1928, and that was the Princess Royal, not of course the present one, but Princess Mary, a daughter of King George V. The first person to visit the new Northern Ireland was King George himself, of course, to open the new Northern Ireland Parliament at Stormont, delivering there a heartfelt speech in which he hoped for good government and peace. Just as an aside, George V grew flax at his estate at Sandringham, and sought the advice of Lord Craigavon, the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, in helping to cultivate it. So in July 1924, the Duke and Duchess of York, the future King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, known of course to many of us later better as the Queen Mother, visited Northern Ireland at the invitation of the Duke of Abercorn, the governor. They sailed upon HMS Rhinoc from Stranraer to Bangor, and the Duchess makes some great notes in her diary, noting of the arrival on the 19th of July. Marvellous day. We sat on the bridge and drank champagne and had great fun, which sounds like an appropriate way to alight at Bangor. Landed 3 hours later to a great reception, thousands of people. In the opinion of her official biographer, William Shawcross, a tendency to combine innocent fun and enjoyment with official duties was characteristic of the Queen, visiting Northern Ireland later in 1962, but then very much in her stride as Queen Mother. She attended the 350th anniversary of the town of Enniskillen, and visited her regiment, the 9th and 12th Lancers, and opened the Department of Physics actually at Queen's University. Then she was off to Downpatrick Racecourse in time to watch her horse Laffy win. Her lady in waiting recording that this was done in front of an enthusiastic and record crowd. She's back again the following October, opening the War Memorial building in Belfast, visiting Ballykinler, and was disappointed that the weather was so poor that she could hardly see the horses at the Maze racecourse. Hillsborough, of course, not being ready just at that point to receive royal visitors, in 1924, the Duke and Duchess were actually driven to Clandyboy, the family home, of course, of the Marquis of Dufferin, which was being used as an official residence for a short time by the Duke of Abercorn. His seat at Baronscourt in County Tyrone being considered to be too far from Belfast. In the days before there were the major security fears that came later, the royal party actually spent nearly a week in Northern Ireland. On Monday the 21st, they were driven to Belfast in Londelette convertible cars. The Duke spoke at the Ulster Hall, and the Duchess notes in her diary that it went very well. And that evening, they attended a dinner and reception at Stormont Castle, and the next day visited York Street spinning mills. And then to lunch at the City Hall, the Duchess recording that the Lord Mayor, next to whom she was sitting, burst into flames, having accidentally set himself alight with his cigar. The Duke received the freedom of the city, and the Duchess a present of silver from the women of Belfast. And then on the 24th, they were off to Derry, Londonderry. No such dual names required for the Duchess, recording in her diary, arrived at Derry at 11. Considering that more than half are nationalists, we had a marvellous welcome, drove to the town hall and got the freedom. They toured the city and the county infirmary, had a civic lunch and reception, and then headed off by train to Coleraine, Ballymoney, first of all, and Ballymena, where the Duke laid the foundation stone of the new town hall. Then back to Belfast to more crowds. It's like a sort of tour of pop stars here. They're everywhere. Crowds of people everywhere, and then back to Belfast, and then on to Mount Stewart, where they spent 2 nights. And on the last one, the Duchess records, danced hard until 2, which I presume is in the morning. So certainly enjoying themselves. The next day, back to Belfast again, back to HMS Rhinoc, and once again, advantage taken of the bridge and champagne drunk again. So a great time, and the visit was widely regarded as a resounding success. And the Duke writing to his father that Elizabeth has been as marvelous as usual, and the people simply love her already. I'm very lucky to have her to help me, as she knows exactly what to do and say to all of the people that we meet. Indeed, as Duchess, Queen, and then Queen Mother, she would make many visits over the decades. The King and Queen's coronation tour in 1937 was another huge success, albeit coloured by some of the menace and threats that would accompany later visits to Northern Ireland. Newspapers on the continent carried reports of assassination threats against them. A customs post was set alight, some railway trucks mined, and a landmine exploded in Belfast. Nevertheless, the visit went off extremely successfully, and the governor's private secretary, Oscar Henderson, who had organised the 1924 visit, judged that the king had firmly cemented the feelings of the people of Ulster to himself on the throne. For the Queen, all our people now have a love which is impossible to put into words, he wrote. Even allowing for the fact that nothing in Northern Ireland is ever as cut and dried as all of that, it suggests that the visit was definitely a huge success. And that particular visit actually saw the largest crowd of people ever to be packed into the square and street of Hillsborough to celebrate the arrival of the newly crowned King and Queen. And incidentally, the King was the first reigning monarch to stay in Hillsborough since William III, almost 250 years before. In 1932, Edward, Prince of Wales, visited, deputising for his father for the state opening of the new Parliament. As the Prince stepped ashore in Belfast Harbour, HMS Caroline, now of course a museum, fired a gun salute. It's said that he sulked during the whole of his visit. Letters were sent out from Hillsborough to the major golf courses about him playing golf the day following the opening. But as soon as he had officially opened Stormont, he rushed off down to the Down Royal golf course for a round. It's been suggested that that Government House and the role of governor helped to bind the monarchy and the fledgling Northern Ireland together. And it's partly why I've sort of dwelt a little bit there on those early visits. Certainly, it provided a means for the two to get to know each other better. But family circumstances had a part to play in that as well. In 1945, Queen Elizabeth's sister, Rose Bowes-Lyon, subsequently the Countess Granville, became a resident of Hillsborough Castle when her husband, the Earl of Granville, was appointed governor, succeeding the long-serving Duke of Abercorn. I'm just looking at the picture, the photograph on the left-hand side, the hunting party. The tall gentleman towards the back, that is the Earl of Granville, and the lady just in front to his right-hand side with the hat at a bit of an angle, dressed quite properly in hunting tweeds with the stick, and I think that's probably a set of pearls, I'm sure, hanging around her neck. That is the Countess. And if you look at her face, if you get a look there, you'll probably will see the likeness of the late Queen Mother. So that's her sister. Throughout the 40s and 50s, King George VI, Queen Elizabeth, and the young princesses Elizabeth and Margaret made regular and quite often informal, less stately, less formal visits, regularly attending services at the parish church on Sundays. And on the right-hand side of the slide, these images, we see the garden, which was initially purely that of roses, planted by Lady Rose, named, and the Granville Garden there you can see named by and after her. The King and Queen conducted a tour of the UK, of course, including Northern Ireland in 1945, accompanied by the teenaged heir to the throne. And it was the young Princess Elizabeth's first trip by plane, was actually to Northern Ireland. And then in March 1946, aged 19, she made her own first visit outside of Great Britain. Northern Ireland being across the sea, but not overseas, was considered ideal for a young princess destined to be queen to undertake a tour of her own. It also provided reassurance that she would be under the watchful eye of her aunt and uncle. Lady Granville wrote to her sister after following the first visit, saying that she had inherited her mother's wonderful gift of looking as if she was loving it all. She continued that she watched the people of Northern Ireland listening to her, and she said, I saw a sort of change come over them, and you could see them thinking that there was something else besides youth and charm. And what is so nice, looking as if they were patting their own backs about it, as if she belonged to them, which I suppose she does in a sort of a way. You must feel very proud of her, darling. I would be. And we can imagine that the Queen was indeed proud of the future Queen, knowing as we do that mother and daughter were extremely close right up to the Queen Mother's passing at the remarkable age of 101, and how much the Queen modelled her reign by the example and values of her mother. On this, her second actually, of what currently stands at 25 visits, official visits to Northern Ireland, Princess Elizabeth launched a ship, HMS Eagle, at Harland and Wolff, and that evening the Granvilles held a dinner in her honour. Rationing was still in place, and the governor's private secretary had to write to the Ministry of Food requesting extra coupons to cover the royal visitor. During the previous visit in 1945, the governor had to request extra coupons for the King's favourite biscuits, which, if anybody would like to know, were custard creams. Of course, just as some of us grew up with the two young princes learning the ropes and coming of age between the 80s and the early 2000s, in the 1940s, there were, of course, two young princesses forced into the spotlight only a few years earlier by the abdication of their uncle. In October 1947, aged 17, it was Princess Margaret's turn to visit Northern Ireland and Hillsborough, saying in a speech, I have heard so much about it from my parents and my sister, and I find it just as delightful as they told me. She too launched a ship at Harland and Wolff, which was doing very well for royal visits in the mid-century, and hosted a dance in the throne room. Princess Elizabeth, having married, of course, the Duke of Edinburgh, as he was to become in 1947, her first visit to Northern Ireland as Duchess of Edinburgh was in 1949, accompanied by the late Duke. Thus, she has visited Northern Ireland as Princess, Duchess, and of course, mostly as Queen. By the early 1950s, the King's health was ailing, and on the 6th of February, we will mark Accession Day at Hillsborough with a gun salute, and the year of the Jubilee celebrations really begins at that point. But of course, on that date, the Queen continues to remember the loss of her father and the day she was informed on tour in Kenya with her husband of the King's passing and her ascent to the throne. The Queen made her first visit in her new role to Hillsborough in 1953, July 1953, and that was the Northern Ireland leg, of course, of her coronation tour. The governorship had moved on again by this stage the previous year, so she was received by Lord and Lady Wakehurst. So looking in the photograph there, we see on the right-hand side, as we look at it, Lord and Lady Wakehurst, and on the left-hand side, we see Viscount and Lady Brookborough. The Queen wore for the occasion one of her favourite tiaras. The one sitting in the top right-hand image in the slide there is not the original. I'll let you know. Sitting on a cushion casually in Hillsborough Castle. It's a replica of her favourite tiara, the Queen Mary Girls of Britain and Ireland tiara. The original is kept in Her Majesty's private jewel collection in Buckingham Palace. And the visit allowed local people the possibility of catching a glimpse of the new Queen, which is just as well because on Coronation Day, there were only 2 television sets in Hillsborough. Following the visit, Lord Wakehurst opened the grounds of Government House to the public, some reports claiming that over 20,000 people came from all over Ireland. And we've got here just a montage of a few of the different visits of the Queen and indeed the Duke of Edinburgh over the years. So the top right-hand image there is that of 1953, the coronation tour itself. I believe, although it wasn't dated, but I believe the one on the bottom right-hand side is actually 1977, representing the Silver Jubilee. And the main picture there, the most recent one, is that is of 2014, a visit of the Queen and the Duke. So the visit of the first visit of Prince Charles and Princess Anne was actually in 1961 when they accompanied their parents to Northern Ireland. They stayed behind at Hillsborough Castle while the Queen and the Duke visited, guess where? Harland and Wolff, then had lunch at the City Hall with the Lord Mayor and opened Castlereagh Industrial Estate in East Belfast. Reflecting then, I suppose, the time moving on and the security concerns of the time, the Queen's first helicopter flight to Northern Ireland was for the Silver Jubilee visit in 1977. Taking off from Belfast Lough, the Queen and the Duke arrived at Hillsborough just a few minutes later. And of course, that mode of transport has been useful since, particularly for the visit of Presidents Clinton in 2000 and Bush in 2003. In recent years, and in the light of the developing and maturing peace process, we might say, some of the Queen's visits have been important for reasons other than just keeping in touch with her people, and some have been consciously diplomatic in nature. Her visit in 2001, alongside the Duke of Edinburgh, as so many have been, saw her open Lisburn's new Island Civic Centre, and the following year she conferred upon Lisburn and Newry the statuses of cities. Her meeting with the President of Ireland, Mary McAleese, was the first time that a British monarch had met with the head of an independent Ireland on the island of Ireland. And that paved the way for the Queen to visit Dublin in May 2011, which was the first visit, first by a British monarch since that of her grandfather, George V, exactly 100 years to the month before that. And it's perhaps not coincidental, given the strong personal rapport, which I think you do get from the photograph there, that the President McAleese's final official engagement outside of the Republic of Ireland was actually at a reception at Hillsborough Castle. I will point out as well, actually, just from the photographs, they're all of the Red Room, which I have pretended to be sitting in this evening, but it also gives you an idea of how the room has changed. You can see on the top right hand, the black and white photograph before it was a Red Room. It was a drawing room, and that would have been that was in 1926, just after the house had been refitted for the first governor, when it was known as Government House. The picture in 2005 of the Queen and the President, you can see there the decor is kind of like a sort of pillar postbox red, and then you can see on the photograph on the bottom right-hand side, since the representation of Hillsborough Castle, it's now absolutely packed with pictures from the royal collection mainly, some other collections as well, and you can see it's now decorated in a very lush red silk damask as well. So it just shows the different ways in which the castle's been presented over the years as well. Throughout these years, and since many other members of the royal family have visited Hillsborough to carry out official engagements, awards, ceremonies, garden parties, particularly the Prince of Wales, in recent years, the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall. Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, of course, and the Duke and Duchess of Wessex. Diana, Princess of Wales, made her first visit in 1985 and was the royal representative at a garden party in 1992. And in recent years, Prince Harry and, of course, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. In time, we hope and are sure their children will also visit and come to regard Hillsborough as their home and part of the story of their family as well. Our dual role as a diplomatic and political home also continues, whether the talks be related purely to Northern Ireland or other political matters, and indeed as a secure location used to looking after high-profile individuals. We do get other interesting visitors too. In the same week last September, that the Duke and Duchess of Wessex stayed with us, we also hosted former First Lady Hillary Clinton, who has happy memories of Hillsborough from the late 90s, and also her friendship with Secretary of State, the late Mo Mowlam. In recognition of these long-standing and meaningful links, Hillsborough has recently been recognised by earning the distinction of becoming a royal town. In 2021, it was announced that letters patent would be issued, granting the prefix royal. Those letters patent came into effect on the 20th of October last year. As such, it's the only town in Northern Ireland, on the island of Ireland, and indeed one of only 4 towns in the whole of the United Kingdom to be designated royal. And as we move into the year ahead, a year in which we anticipate the celebration of Her Majesty's extraordinary achievement of 70 years on the throne, it's a fantastic achievement and recognition of our links with the royal family. If I may almost finally be permitted the liberty of making a huge and unashamed plug. We've been open only slightly over the past 2 years, and as a charity, we'd very much appreciate your support and everybody's support as we open our doors again. This we expect to do in the early part of April. There could hardly be a better time to come and visit a royal residence. Bring yourselves, bring your families, your societies, clubs, church groups, anything else you belong to. And if you've been, come again, but if you haven't, it's a fantastic visit. We have 100 acres of glorious historic gardens to visit and explore as well. And that more or less brings me to the end. I hope that you may have found this talk at least somewhat interesting, and for the time that we're allowed, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. And on that note, I will attempt to stop sharing this screen and hand back to Nick.
Alan, excuse me, Alan, thank you so much. That was very, very interesting. I do not live that far away from Hillsborough. Even though I work on the beautiful North Coast, I live on the arguably equally beautiful sort of shores of Loch Ness. So Hillsborough is only 20 minutes away. We would visit quite often. Obviously, it has never actually crossed my mind to try and gain access into the castle. So knowing that, you know, that public access is there, it's certainly something that we'll do in the future.
Just on that, the way it seems the plan to work this year, we were open in 2019. That was our opening year, and then closed for the 2 after that, more or less. Yeah, the plan is that the castle itself from April time will be open 5 days a week. So we'll open Wednesdays through until Sundays. The gardens, yeah, they're open the 5 days a week as we speak, and obviously you're visiting. So yeah, it'll be great to get it back up and open again for the tours. Yeah.
Lovely. I have a question or two that I could ask, but before I hog the microphone, are there any questions from any of the participants here tonight? Nothing so far. Well, I'll certainly ask my questions. I suppose working backwards through your talk, you say that Hillsborough is the only town within Ireland to have the designation of a royal town. In practical terms, what does that actually give the town?
It's really a token of recognition. The fact that it's the only official royal residence. So I suppose that's really what it gives it. It's kind of recognition of that status. And I suppose thinking back of the various different sort of twists and turns, there's nothing guaranteed about having a residence in any particular location. It's not, I suppose, an absolute necessity to have royal residences. And it's a reflection really, I suppose, of the fact that it was selected as the place where the governors of Northern Ireland would be located. And then whenever that function changed, the fact that it was also the official royal residence. So it kind of, I suppose, just binds further the royal family to that particular place. And obviously now with the better part of a century of visits, consistent visits, it really just kind of seals that relationship. And it's I suppose, putting my other hat on, my day-to-day hat, it's a great selling point internationally. It kind of really assists in that association with the royal family, and particularly those markets overseas that are really interested in royalty, in Irish history. It's a really strong thing there as well. So it just really binds the town and the royal family and recognises, I suppose, the years of service and residency.
Lovely, thank you. Another question. So you mentioned there that Wilshill built, or at least started to build, the house as it is today, the palace as it is today. Palace, castle, house?
It can go by either. Sometimes goes by them all.
So prior to that, was the residence within the fort that's there by the lake? Or what's the relationship between the fort and the castle, I suppose?
Yeah, so the castle was, so the fort was a home from around about 1630. Before that, things are a little bit sketchy. The best understanding seems to be that the family prior to around about the 1630s lived in a grand house that was known as a hall. And again, you'll be familiar with the area of Hill Hall. So it was somewhere in and around, I suppose, somewhere between vaguely that sort of Shaw's Bridge area of South Belfast, out towards kind of Drumbow side of things. It was exactly where, I don't think is actually known for sure. That seems to have been the first home. The second home then seems to have been the what we nowadays refer to as the fort. And there are various theories. Some people would suggest that it was originally known as Hillsborough Castle, and then that's how the name transferred to the present day castle. But the bit that is also unclear is that there are suggestions that there was actually a house on the site of the present day, what we call the castle. So the present Hillsborough Castle, and that actually was destroyed by a fire sometime between around about 1700. It would have been built and burnt down somewhere between 1700 and 1750. But all of that is a little bit unsure. The only bit we are sure of is because at one stage we had actually thought that the present castle was started to be constructed somewhere around about 1770. But that story doesn't check out anymore, not least the fact that Benjamin Franklin did visit it in 1771. We know it was definitely there by that stage. So our best understanding is that it goes 1600-ish, somewhere in a place called Hill Hall. 1630, what we now call the fort was built. possibly something built, started around about 1700 on the present site of the castle, and then the castle as it presently presents, constructed somewhere around about 1750 or the early 1750s. To add a further complication into that, there was in 1934 a major fire in the present castle, and was actually very substantially destroyed. Luckily, the original plans for the castle, as conceived by Wills Hill, did survive, albeit it doesn't appear that they were dated. And the castle was very swiftly rebuilt between the years 1934 and 1936. So there's quite a lot going on in terms of the dates and the phases and where the family actually lived. And there's a reasonable amount still of doubt and uncertainty around some of it. So that may not answer your question, because it's quite quite difficult to answer.
It's fascinating, thank you. I mean, yes, it seems to mirror patterns that you see with lots of big houses and forts and that sort of thing across the country. But no, yeah. Fascinating. I can see Seamus has a hand up there. Seamus, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Alan, so much. And look, I'm not asking for an answer to this question, but just first, something I didn't know, that Her Majesty's aunt was resident in Hillsborough. And that put me in mind of something that I've heard but haven't, I ought to be exploring it before asking the question. There's a story that the Bowes-Lyons family can trace their ancestry back to a marriage between Sorcha, the daughter of Redhugh O'Neill, I think it was, and a marriage of political, which was the norm at the time. And the marriage was to an aristocratic family, then either resident in County Down or with a residence in County Down.
Interesting.
And that therefore, it's an issue that came up at the time that Her Majesty came to Dublin, and you know, an awareness of that connection as well. So I find it very interesting that Her Majesty's aunt actually lived there, she being a Bowes-Lyons person.
Yeah. And I don't know any of that. However, I also like the story, and would hope there's something in it.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's an interesting thing, and I think the reason I kind of dwelt on that period a little bit is that I think it did kind of create a family atmosphere to the castle.
Yeah.
The fact that her sister and brother-in-law, albeit that they were there in a capacity of service as governor of governors, I think it's very interesting, and it meant then that even thinking of the way that the royal family has developed, the Queen Mother was obviously a very large figure within the royal family in sense of the length of time that she served, but also the kind of the model of charitable work, which has been passed on then to her daughter. So that whole span of the 20th century and right into the early part of the 21st century has really been set by effectively those two women. And then to have that link in the middle part of the 20th century with Northern Ireland through them living here, I just think is quite an interesting thing. And it's the reason why particularly the Queen knows Hillsborough very well, and therefore has an attachment to it that she wouldn't maybe necessarily have with another residence that was purely functional and just happened to be located in Northern Ireland. It does mean something a little bit more different, something extra. But I definitely like the story, and I very much hope that genealogical link is absolutely bang on. We'll have to find out.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you.
The last talk in this series, of course, is Dr. Mark Humphreys, who will be looking at the Queen's Irish ancestry.
Oh,
So
right.
there is a good chance that we might come across there.
Yeah.
I can see that Peter's hand is up, but before I jump to Peter, Dennis, your hand hovered briefly.
I don't know what happened then again. I was just thinking about the number of royal towns in the United Kingdom, and I can think of 5, and I wonder which one is actually incorrect.
Ooh. It's either that or it's either that or I'm incorrect, Dennis. But certainly when I was doing my research, okay. Well, which 5 did you?
I had, apart from Hillsborough, Royal Windsor, Royal Lytham St Anne's, Royal Stranraer, and Royal Wootton Bassett.
Don't know. I'm gonna have to find out. Because if I'm wrong, then my sources are wrong, and I'm gonna have to question everything. I can't answer that one off the top of my head, Dennis. But I'll have to do a little bit of research into it.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you.
Peter, did you want to come in now? Oh, you're muted, Peter.
Yes, I was quite interested in the very early history when there was a mention of a lady called Alice as the sister of Sorley Boy. Given that Sorley Boy died in 1590 at the age of 90, surely Alice would have been the sister of the first Earl, who was Sorley Boy's son, Randall.
Another interesting point.
We did have a Dowager Countess Alice who did reside in the castle at Ballycastle and was actually evicted from her house by General Monroe's troops at the time of the 1641.
Again, another one I'm going to have to take away with me and find out. This is where people who know more about certain aspects and periods are able to challenge it, which is very useful because a lot of this has been passed down as received knowledge, and I'm definitely going to have to check that out. Yes, the age thing is definitely sounding a little bit challenging there, Peter. So, gonna have to.
Can I also just make an observation?
Certainly.
I have been in the Red Room at the. I was at a reception in it at the time Peter Hayne was Northern Ireland Secretary.
Yeah.
And I thought actually it was a very cold feeling building and was a bit genteelly shabby. I'm glad to see there's a lot of time and effort and money being put into it since, because I thought it deserved better than it was at that time.
Well, on behalf of Historic Royal Palaces, then I'm very happy to take that compliment. And hopefully the little, I don't know if you've been in it. Have you been in it since?
No.
But
I intend to.
Yeah, that would be good. I mean, we think we've done a good job on it, but then we're biased. So I'm hoping that you'll be happy with what we have done. And I mean, on that, I suppose what we've tried to do is to reflect the fact that it is a royal residence. It also has to reflect the fact that it does have that sort of dual purpose, but you can possibly even see the image that was in the screen. I'm not sure if that's still there now. Of the drawing room is a kind of it does have a softer, warmer feel to it as well than if you remember the images back in the mid 1980s when that was the room, that sort of iconic image of the signing of the Anglo-Irish Agreement. Again, there was a slightly more functional look, I think, to some of the rooms, reflecting its use as a political residence. But I think now it does have a slightly more homely and hopefully warmer feel that you will approve of.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions here this evening? Tommy, yeah.
Right, Nick, get me? Yes?
Yes,
Yes,
we can
Tommy.
hear you.
Alan, firstly, I thoroughly enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
As someone who is very, very regularly in Hillsborough and at the castle, I have been there many, many times during the summer because I was touring. And I take many, many English visitors there. And publicly, I would like to say to you about the hospitality that is there from the staff that greet us. I'm always there at a coach, and we meet up in the village square, right? And we're addressed by some of the girls and sometimes a gentleman, and also down to the person who is normally doing the security and checking the ladies' handbags, etc. And every day during the past summer that I was there, we had all that fantastic hot summer weather. And it was absolutely beautiful, and I can thoroughly recommend it to people to go there. And in particular, it's very nice if you're going in the car to go to the new car park coming off the A1 and the nice little cafe, and then walk up through the walled garden to the house. I thoroughly recommend it, folks. So thank you very much, Alan.
Thank you, and thank you very much for that unsolicited recommendation. Very much appreciate it from someone who visits so much. So yeah, no, thank you. We do try our best. So
I'll
glad
maybe
you
meet you there someday. We'll have a coffee someday.
Yes. Sounds good.
Yep.
Be glad to.
Folks, unless there's any other burning questions, I might stop the recording here. We have Seamus is speaking with us next week about imperial legacies.